Oregon's going to Madison for the first time since 2000. I was 3 years old. What sort of threat does Wisconsin pose? It's not what it used to be.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, it is that time for a Locked On College crossover episode of Locked On Ducks and Locked On Badgers. That's Ryan Harings, Locked On Badgers. I'm Spencer McLaughlin, Locked On Ducks. Thank you for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and brought to you today by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. After this episode, you will be much more informed, perhaps almost perfectly informed, for everything you need to know in this particular game. We'll put each other metaphorically on the witness stand and ask the biggest questions that our teams have to answer. But I said what I said to begin this show, Ryan, for Oregon fans out there who think of Wisconsin as rough and tough and pound the rock and run the ball and under center. And with Luke Fickell in his second year, it's not the case. It looks different than it used to, but how can Wisconsin push Oregon in this spot with their second-year head coach?
Yeah, no, it's a great lead, and it's definitely not what traditionally Wisconsin or Oregon fans, college football fans would think of with the Badgers. It's a team that's still finding its footing, quite frankly. 2 years in, 1.5 years into the Luke Fickell era, they switched offenses. They're trying to run more of an air raid system where they're spreading the field, trying to generate a little more advantageous opportunities for the passing game. That hasn't clicked. We talked about it before the show a little bit. Ultimately, Braden Locke throws too many picks, right? So that part of the offense hasn't clicked. Now, Wisconsin still wants to run the ball. If you're an Oregon fan coming to Madison, quite frankly, you're going to have a hell of a time. We welcome you here. There's great beer, great people, but you're not going to see a team that doesn't want to run the ball. They still, with Tyree Walker and Oklahoma import, they want to be physical. They want to run between the tackles, and they're going to try to do that. And if Oregon doesn't stop them, that's what Wisconsin will do. But they haven't been able to impose their will like traditional Wisconsin teams. The offensive line isn't quite where it was at the peak of Wisconsin, and they don't have that passing attack to back linebackers and safeties off. So it's just been a mess a little offensively. Defensively, a lot of the Wisconsin guys you think of from the last 10 years, the Dave Aranda defenses, the Jim Leonard defenses, you're thinking of Leo Chanel, you're thinking of TJ Watt, you're thinking of these really dynamic front seven players. Wisconsin doesn't really have that either. So it's been more of a bend but don't break defense, giving up more yardage than they typically do. They've been pretty good in the red zone, so they have been able to kind of cut off some drives when they get there. But it's a team that looks like it is in a transition stage because it is in a transition stage. I think one thing Badger fans are going to be excited about, going back to this Wisconsin-Oregon quasi-rivalry, is there's no LaMichael James coming to Madison. There's no Thomas. There's no Justin Herbert. There's been some guys that have given us nightmares. Not that you don't still have them, but at least we are faster. I will say this. The Wisconsin team that Oregon fans have seen the last couple matchups, this Wisconsin team is more athletic. They're faster. I do think they've upgraded speed. But, yeah, it's a team finding its footing. They're coming off a 42-10 loss in Kinnick to Iowa where it just all fell apart. Luckily, the Badgers did get a bye week, so there's a week to kind of get better there. But you're not wrong. It's a different version of what Wisconsin has traditionally been.
Yeah, and for Oregon, they're 10-0, ranked number 1 in the country, and playing the sort of football where I've got to find complaints from Oregon fans who are sifting through the rubble trying to figure out what was wrong with that 21-point victory against Maryland. Oregon hasn't been a great team against the spread this year. That's really the biggest knock, is they're favored by a lot. They're not always covering those numbers. It's not 56-7 every single week, but last week against Maryland, Oregon had, I think, not a great game offensively. Defense kind of carried the day. There was a defensive touchdown with Jordan Birch having a strip sack, Brandon Johnson running it back the other way. But stylistically, do you think this Wisconsin team is at all similar to Maryland? Because frankly, though it ended up being a 39-18 game, that was the biggest challenge I felt that Oregon has had in Big Ten play outside of Ohio State, at least at home. You put the Michigan game in there, but that again was more about Oregon making mistakes. I get the sense that if Oregon plays well, if they play a cleaner game than they did last week against Maryland, Oregon goes in and covers the 14.5 point spread. But if they don't, Ryan, what's your confidence level that if Oregon makes mistakes for a second straight week, the Badgers can hang around?
Yeah, listen, I think there's a scenario where this game is closer than people think, which is why I think the line is a little lower than people were to guess, I saw a lot of people thinking.
I agree. I thought it would be a little bit higher.
And to see 14.5, I mean, first of all, 99% of the public money is going to be on Oregon. We both know this, which is why it's probably going to be like a 12-point game. It's probably going to be Oregon late. And I kind of wonder if Oregon hasn't had a bye in, I think, 8 weeks, right? So I wonder
the bye for Oregon is next week.
I wonder if there's a little bit of getting beat up, maybe a little bit. Now you have to go you cross 2 time zones. You're going to go to Madison, a road game. Yeah, I think those elements start to play a toll. I think me and you and I were talking before the show about how before the season, Oregon and USC fans and UCLA fans heard about how physical the Big Ten is and how you might struggle. Well, Oregon's 10-0. It's been a lovely trip to the Big Ten for you.
So far, so good.
I do think playing 8 straight games at any level, in any conference, starts to wear a team down. And then you have to go on the road. So I think there's a scenario there. You look at the last time we talked about it, the Penn State game. At night, a couple weeks ago, Wisconsin really played well in that game. It was 14-13 heading into the fourth quarter. They can play and punch up at home at night. That environment, if the game is close, is going to be loud. It's going to be exciting. So I think that's the scenario. Maybe Oregon is just a tick beat up from 8 straight games. Now they have to go on the road. Wisconsin's coming off a bye. They're going to be a little fresh. There is a scenario where this game gets a little closer, and then that environment starts to play in. I will say this. I said this on my show the other day. Wisconsin can't punch up to Oregon's ceiling. Oregon is going to have to play down a little bit for this to be a game. But that happens in college football sometimes. Sometimes teams go on the road and they do play down. So I think you're right. I think that's the scenario to keep it close. But I think Vegas sees that scenario potentially, which is why that line is 14.5.
Yeah, and the 2 top 5 teams, or at least at the time, Bama's not top 5, but Bama's still a really good football team. Surprise, surprise. I can't believe it. The 2 top 5 teams that Wisconsin has played at home, they've lost by an average of 23.5 points per game. Now, in that first matchup with Alabama, when it all went awry, the final score was 42-10. Tyler Van Dyke gets hurt, and you have to undergo the quarterback change, and Braden Locke has stepped in. He's got moments. This is a guy who was a 24/7 composite 4-star coming out of high school, and he's been in college for a couple of years. When I watch him, Ryan, I think there are moments where he reminds me, frankly, a lot of Billy Edwards Jr. at Maryland. He's going to have moments where you're like, that was a really good throw. And then there are going to be moments where you go, what in the heck were you doing, man?
Yeah. You kind of nailed the Braden Locke experience right there. A roller coaster of some fun highs and some terrible lows. He's made some great throws. And he's made great throws against some really big-time athletes. He hit a deep stop and go against USC. He hit a deep shot down the seam to CJ Williams against Penn State, where it's just a beautiful throw. He can lace it in there. He has a really, really nice touch when he's able to set his feet and see the play. He struggles if that first read isn't there, right? If he comes out of his break, out of the snap, plants that back foot, and he sees what he wants to see, he can thread the needle. But the problem is off-platform stuff, right? Where at the college level, how often do you have an incredibly clean pocket? You have the coverage you expect, and the receiver breaks right where you think he should. Against high-level teams, that just doesn't happen often, and that's where we've seen the wheels fall off. Against winning programs this year, Wisconsin's averaging about 11 points per game. Against high-level programs, the offense hasn't been able to move the ball against better defenses, and that's where, again, I think you're going to see struggles, where Wisconsin is going to have to win the turnover battle. They're going to be +1 or +2 in this game to keep it close, and that's just the reality of it. And if they do that, if they can play from ahead and they can kind of keep Oregon off footing, Braden Locke can make some throws. Don't be surprised when he hits a couple, but he just hasn't been able to avoid the backbreaker. He hasn't been able to avoid that one throw in the middle of a game where momentum is in the middle of the 2 teams, where he just throws it right to the opposing team and they score a touchdown coming off of that. Until he does that, I don't know how Wisconsin can beat a team of Oregon's caliber.
That's one question Wisconsin has to answer, but they have more as well, and we are going to answer those questions right after we talk about Game Time. Of course, Game Time's got everything that you want over there, and this feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier, including this matchup, Oregon-Wisconsin in Madison. If you're an Oregon fan, you want to go, Game Time is the place to get your tickets. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on everything you want. Sports, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever you want, they've got it. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect upon arrival. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It is game time. All right, Ryan, here are questions that I've got from an Oregon standpoint for Wisconsin. We talked about Braden Locke at quarterback a bit, but talk about the offensive line. Jordan Birch might play in this game, could play, should play, you call it whatever you want. Even when he hasn't been there, Oregon's defensive line has been nasty. Derek Harmon, who you may remember from Michigan State, is really, really good. And Mateo Uyunglele, who was a former 5-star recruit, is coming into his own in a sophomore season, and there are a bunch of other guys that can make impact plays as well. So your confidence level in Wisconsin's offensive line holding up in pass protection for, as you described, a mostly air raid offense for Braden Locke and head coach Luke Fickell is what?
Yeah, I really also wanted to just ask you, what's it like to have a bevy of 4- and 5-star blue chip?
It pays off. It pays off. You know, I hear sometimes from fans, recruiting doesn't matter anymore. It's all about the portal. I don't know. I'm looking around at Oregon's roster, and it's like, look, a former 5-star left tackle, he's playing. Former 5-star defensive end, he's playing. Former 4-star defensive end, he's playing. I think this high school recruiting stuff can still pay off.
So it's fun, huh?
It's a good time. It's a good time right now.
Yeah, so to answer your question, man, I actually feel pretty good about the Wisconsin offensive line. I think the thing is offense is a bit of an ecosystem, and it's the other parts around it that don't always come together. Right, it's hard to expect an offensive line to hold up when Wisconsin against Penn State was continually in, and Iowa as well was continually in 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8. Right, if you give a really good defensive line 3rd and 8s with a good coaching staff, they're going to scheme stuff up. It's just hard. It's difficult. So I think a lot gets put on this offensive line. Now there is a fair point of, well, why are you in 3rd and 8s? Because you didn't run well 1st and 2nd down. That's on the line for sure. But even in those downs, I was going to put 8 in the box, 9 in the box. And again, that's tough on an offensive line. A lot of it comes back to that lack of a consistent passing game, which I think really hurts the line's ability. This is a pretty good Wisconsin offensive line. It's not a great one. It's not an elite one. They have 2 really veteran offensive tackles that played a bunch of ball. Both will probably get a shot in the NFL later round type picks. They have a veteran center who was with Luke Fickell in Cincinnati, was an all AAC performer. And then they have a really talented young guard, Joe Brunner, that they like a lot. It's a good offensive line. It's not deep. If an injury happens, which they've been lucky to avoid, they'll be fine. But again, I just don't think the offense sets them up in a position that's at times the fairest thing. So I don't know if that's an answer. It's a bit of a rambling answer. It's a good line, but it's tough to be a great line when you're continually in 3rd and 8. It's tough to be a great line when you can't pass the ball.
Yeah, and flipping over to the other side, Wisconsin's run defense this year hasn't been stellar. 164 yards a game allowed. Probably not where Luke Fickell would like it to be. What is your assessment of how they stopped the run this year? Because Oregon's passing attack just put up its worst total of the season last week without Tez Johnson, who I wouldn't think plays this week for the Ducks. Maybe against Washington. Certainly, I think he's trying for the Big Ten championship game, but I don't think he'll be out there for the matchup against the Badgers this weekend in Madison. But Oregon last week against Maryland, who had been pretty solid against the run themselves, went for 180 yards and 5.8 yards a carry. What's your assessment of how Wisconsin has handled that area?
Inconsistently. So this goes back a little bit to the point I made originally, where Wisconsin doesn't have those 4- and 5-star guys on the defensive line. This is a defensive line that coming into the year was looked upon as one of the spots on the team that was probably one of the weaker points. And then before the year, they lost their best defensive end. So it's the defensive line that's not particularly deep, and it's also bereft of talented impact players. So that's a problem. And then Coach Tressel, Mike Tressel, the defensive coordinator, has been playing a lot of light fronts, and fans.
Is that Jim Tressel's son?
Yep. Connection there.
Nice.
To the Big Ten.
Yeah.
Yep. And he was with him at Cincinnati, so he came over to Madison. He's the defensive coordinator. He's been playing a lot of 2-4-5 and just not really wanting to adjust out of that, which in some situations is fine. But when you're playing Iowa and they throw the ball 10 times and score 42 points, bro, put another defensive lineman on the field. So I think there's a lack of talent, but there's also been some coaching adjustments that it seems like haven't happened. At the linebacker level, they brought in 5 transfers this year, and it feels like the entire year has been this constant push and pull of trying to find the right Lego pieces to put into that. So I think consistency has hit there as well. It's not been a great rush defense, specifically when you look at what Wisconsin traditionally does. And that's hurt them as well. Teams have been able to run when they've wanted to run. And I don't really see why that would change against Oregon. The Badgers secondary is better. It's one of the strengths of their team. They have veterans back there, a couple really good players, veteran safety, veteran cornerback Ricardo Holman had 7 picks in the Big Ten last year. But again, when you can give teams 2nd and 4, 3rd and 2, right, your secondary can't play up the way it's supposed to.
Against Penn State a few weeks ago, a game that I actually picked Wisconsin to win in an upset because it looked like they had kind of righted the ship for 3 games. They played some lower-level competition, Purdue, Northwestern, and Rutgers, but they blew them all out. I mean, just absolutely blasted them, played well on offense, played well on defense. The Nittany Lions went for 173 yards in that game on the ground and just under 5 yards a carry. Do you feel like Oregon is going to have those same sorts of numbers, or is there an adjustment that you think this Wisconsin defense will make, or is that just going to be available to Oregon anytime they want? Hey, you can push for 200 yards on the ground.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would like to see coming out of the bye week a few adjustments, maybe play a little heavier fronts when teams are gashing against the run. But you know this too. You've watched a ton of ball. When you're 10 games into a year, teams usually kind of are who they are. Right? Like there's not a whole lot, even coming out of a bye week, that you can like pull off the mask and be like, surprise, we stopped the run now. Like we figured it out. It's 10 games in, you kind of are who you are, unfortunately. Can they be a little better? Yeah. I think Wisconsin was in a bad spot in that Iowa game, right? You had the Penn State game at night, big environment. You kind of cough it up. Then you have to go to Kinnick. This bye week came at a great spot, like a great spot for them to get a little fresher. So it might be a little stouter, but it's been an issue all year, and I have no reason to think it's going to magically get fixed for Oregon. I am curious if you flip it. Like I'm trying to find where's the dent in the armor for Oregon. By the way, really quickly, I always say Oregon. Is it Oregon or Oregon?
It sounded like you said the same thing twice.
Perfect, and I'm good.
You're good. If I haven't corrected you, if I haven't pressed pause on this recording to correct you on the pronunciation of Oregon, then you're doing fine. Because anytime someone says Oregon, I say no. There's none of this Lou Holtz Oregon nonsense. Just get that out of your lexicon right now. So you're good. You're good.
Some type of like little difference there, but I'm good then. I'll just call them the Mighty Ducks of I don't know. I'll go somewhere else with it. But can Wisconsin? I think the one area where if I look at it, and outside of the nonsense of they get 3 turnovers, they return a kick for a touchdown, Oregon's defensive line is very athletic. Can you run on them a little bit? Because it does look, if you look at average yards per carry, they're more middle-ish of the pack of the Big Ten. And again, I'm searching here, right? I'm trying to find where the dent may be. That Oregon's 10-0 for a reason. Yeah. Where's the dent? Where's the scenario outside of football craziness where Wisconsin makes this a game, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think that. Well, can we save that as question 1 for the third segment? Because I had one more question to ask you, and then we'll flip things around. Wisconsin's pass defense is top 10 in yards allowed per game this season. Is that because they're facing passing offenses that are inept, or is it because they are good? Because they haven't played Ohio State, they've played Iowa, they've played Penn State. Neither one of those teams I think are great throwing the football. Or they've played Rutgers, who like to run it with Kyle Monunga. Like, what is behind the strong numbers for Wisconsin defending the air?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's kind of like, let's say you're a martial artist and you can't defend against kicks, but you're okay against punches. Well, a guy's just going to kick you all day long. They don't have to throw a punch, right? And my point is, teams have been able to run the ball pretty effectively. They haven't really had to throw a lot. So there's an element of that. If you can just run the ball consistently against the Badgers, why air it out? Now, Wisconsin secondary is pretty good. That is legitimately the strength of this defense. Ricardo Holman, I mentioned, had 7 picks last year. He's a veteran corner, really, really good. Great ball awareness, good quickness. Hunter Wohler at safety is maybe the best player on the defense. Led the team in tackles last year. Again, another veteran. Preston Zachman is another veteran at safety. Has played a ton of ball. Nizer Forkran on the other side at cornerback has been playing really well. So that is the strength of the team. It makes sense why teams haven't wanted to test it as much. There's games that we'll play where teams just literally won't throw the ball at Ricardo Holman because they don't want to deal with that dude. So talent is there. That's the strength of the team. And also teams can just run the ball. And to your point, play a Rutgers, you play an Iowa, you play a Northwestern. Those also aren't passing threats. But Wisconsin has played in Bama. They did play at Penn State. Who again is good, decent through the air. They're not elite, but they played some teams that will try to throw the ball around. But I think ultimately offensive coordinators, other teams, if I only have to throw the ball 10 times because they could just run at will. So you're going to take the easier candy if you can. And I think that's mostly what we've seen with the Badgers defense this year.
Now we're going to flip it around. And Ryan shall question me about everything Oregon has to answer in this football game right after this. And this is FanDuel. This is absolutely FanDuel 100% across the board. They've got the line at 14.5. 14.5. If you think Oregon's covering, by all means, go bet it at FanDuel.com. If you think Wisconsin off a bye at home, that's a compelling case to make on a show like this one for why Wisconsin covers. But anything you want, they've got it over at FanDuel.com. And right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. It's that simple. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. Just go join them at FanDuel.com. When you get that hunch in the middle of the game, boom, you can place it at FanDuel.com. Again, $150 in bonus bets for new customers if you win your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, final segment of the day. Ryan, I can jump into the question that you asked me earlier about Oregon and can you run on them? The answer is it depends on the week, but overall, not really. Last week, Maryland, that likes to throw the ball more than they run it, went for 83 yards on the ground. They were under 3 yards a carry. Oregon's run defense was really, really good. But then you watch a game like Purdue, and if you watch that game start to finish, you saw, hey, Purdue ran the ball up and down the field. Then they would get to about the Oregon 40-yard line, and the defense would kind of snap into gear and say, all right, enough of this. We're going to sell out for the run on first down. We're going to make you throw it. Maybe you'll get a short completion, but then on 3rd and 8, we're just going to pressure the quarterback or have an incompletion. So, yeah, I'd say Oregon has been more vulnerable to the run than the past this year, but that's not to say that I feel bad about either area. I love this Oregon defense. I think 55-45, this is a defensively led team, which is crazy to say when you have a guy who is top 2 in Heisman odds right now at quarterback in Dillon Gabriel, who only had 184 yards last week. I'd expect he bounces back a little bit and is in the 250-260 range, but maybe not if Oregon can just line up and run the football. But the defense has got NFL guys at all 3 levels, all conference caliber guys at all 3 levels, and like at least one. And I think that has really been on display this year, but it starts with the defensive line. They are deep, they are talented, they are veteran. They've got young up-and-comers like Mateo Uiagalelei or Tatum Tuioti. They have got veterans like Jordan Birch and Derek Harmon and Jamari Caldwell as well. These guys have all delivered on the prospect that I hyped them up to be this year, because I said this is Oregon's best defensive line since 2014 when they had DeForest Buckner and Eric Armstead. Now, they might not have 2 top 10 picks in the NFL draft on this unit, but I think it's deeper than that particular line was. Like, they're just disruptive. They can blow up running plays. They can get after the quarterback. The biggest thing with this Oregon defense, if you watch last week's game against Maryland, they got to get out of their own way. 12 penalties in the game, 6 of them led to Maryland first downs, and multiple gave Maryland an opportunity to score when they otherwise wouldn't have. There was a pass interference by Tysheem Johnson that was just completely unnecessary. He's coming down in coverage. Maryland's going for it on 4th and 7 at like the Oregon 25, 30-ish yard line or so, and the ball is thrown high and behind, and he can just come down and make a play on the ball or not make a play at all, and instead he just grabs the wide receiver, and you just watch it going, what are you doing? What's happening here? Why did you do that? Why did you grab him? You didn't need to, and if you hadn't, then Maryland doesn't get points. Or a 3rd and goal, Tysheem Johnson again, illegal contact. That one was a little bit more of a questionable call, but I understand why the flag was thrown. It was not. I didn't think it was an egregious call from the referee. It didn't have to be thrown, but it certainly could have been thrown, and so it was. And that's what this Oregon defense was. I thought they would allow 7 points to Maryland last week, and they gave up 18. That's a bad day. Like by the standard that they have set this year, it's not a great day. Each of the last 2 weeks, they've given up 17.5 points per game, and that's more than I thought they would. So that's kind of where they're at. They've got to get out of their own way. If they do, the defense is really, really good.
Let me ask you this on flipping on the other side. The Badgers are probably almost certainly going to play some form of bend but don't break. Cover 3, a little cloud coverage, drop 2. They're not going to play a ton of man press, single high. Is Oregon going to be comfortable enough just slowly going up and down the field? Will the patience be there? And once they get into the red zone, the Badgers have been pretty good there. How has Oregon been in the red zone this year, and how are they going to try to attack maybe a defense playing a little more cloud coverage?
I'll start with the first question. The answer, I think, is yes. If you go watch the Oregon State game, they went into that matchup knowing we cannot cover these guys down the field. They will hit 50 and 60-yard touchdowns all the time. We don't have DBs quick enough to keep up with Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart. And so they sat off, and Dillon Gabriel just sat in the pocket and said, all right, here's 10 yards, here's 8, there's 15, there's another 8, there's another 10, and he picked them apart the entire game. If you watch last week against Maryland, they also played a lot of two deep safeties and didn't let Oregon push the ball down the field and made them take the underneath stuff. But Oregon wasn't clicking. They just weren't. It's not that they were forcing it down the field and saying, no, we have to hit these deep shots. They were trying to hit the intermediate throws, but it was just rusty, particularly out of the gate. Terrence Ferguson had a drop. Gabriel had some inaccurate throws. They just weren't sharp. So if you play that style against them, they are more than willing to say 5 yards, 10 yards, whatever. And the beauty of this Oregon offense is they're so multiple and they're so talented at every spot that they can do whatever is needed. If Wisconsin's going to let them run the ball at 6 to 7 yards a carry, they will give Jordan James and Noah Whittington a combined 35 touches. But if they take that away and say, we dare you to throw the ball deep like Ohio State, Dillon Gabriel will go for 330 and 4 touchdowns. So I think they've really got everything at their disposal offensively. The red zone is a different question. It has been inconsistent this year. There have been times where it's been good. There were times against Maryland where it wasn't good. They had 1st and goal at the 4, settled for 3 points. They were stopped on a 4th and goal against Ohio State in that big game a month ago. Hard to believe that was a month ago as we were recording the show. But I'd say the red zone offense, okay at best. And I think that's a matchup where Wisconsin, based on what you said, can really lean into, is let them get down to the 7-yard line and then stiffen right there and hold the 3 points. I think that's a good formula for Wisconsin to go after.
And I think that's where Wisconsin has to win for this game to be competitive. I think Oregon's going to move the ball. It comes down to, can Wisconsin hold the field goals? Last question here to kind of wrap up. Is there a chance, because you and I both know that the most talented team doesn't always win in college football. Yep. Is there a chance with bigger prizes on the horizon for Oregon, for sure, college football playoff looming, 8 straight games, bye week next week, coming into a Wisconsin environment that is nationally pretty well respected, but a Wisconsin team that is down for sure? Is there a chance Oregon is potentially overlooking a little bit here or a little worn down playing 8 straight games?
I said coming into this year when discussing this game that it was a major trap game, but it's not as big of a look-ahead factor as it could be because Oregon's opponent next week is a bye. The opponent after that is Washington. That's the most important game on Oregon's schedule. Even more important than Ohio State, Dan Lanning's got to win that football game. He's got to win. There's no excuse to lose it unless Dillon Gabriel gets hurt in this game against Wisconsin and is out for the rest of the year. But even then, got to win that football game. If they were playing Washington next week with the number of returners who went through 2 3-point losses to Washington, one on a field goal that didn't go in and with some 4th down decisions, and then one in the Pac-12 championship game that kept them out of the playoff, like that is sitting in guys' minds whether they would admit it or not. There's no way it isn't. But I think the bye coming next week helps Oregon overlook that factor. But Dan Lanning's messaging that we've seen on Ducks versus Them every week, which are the cinematic recaps for the Wisconsin fans out there who don't know, they're incredibly cool and definitely worth a watch. You might not want to watch the one if Oregon wins this game against Wisconsin because it's all about Oregon, obviously. But they're very cool and incredibly well done regardless. And I think they're truly the best in the country at that. Dan Lanning has spoken a lot about, hey, we have to keep a growth mindset. We have to continue to say we want to get better. And when Lanning was asked several weeks ago about getting Oregon number 1 to the AP poll, his response immediately before the question had even been answered, who cares? Then he smiled and went on to the next question. And I think if the team is embodying that, and I think they are, they play to a standard each week. And they just didn't live up to that a week ago against Maryland. And I wonder if that doesn't fuel them a little bit to be at their best in this game and remind themselves and everybody else as well, hey, we are the team everyone should be looking up at right now because How we played last week, that wasn't us. That wasn't us. We played a C-minus game and won by 21 points. I think that is an interesting element of this game, and on paper should have the look-ahead factor, but the bye week coming out, it's just another way the schedule works out for Oregon in their first year here in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably right. Again, this kind of comes down to the point, and maybe end on this, that I was talking about it, I think in the first segment, where Oregon has to play down. For this to be a legitimate Wisconsin chance. Wisconsin can't punch at Oregon's ceiling. Wisconsin can punch up, but even their punching up is going to require Oregon starting slow, Oregon overlooking something, a bad tipped pass, blocked field goal. It's going to require something.
You're describing the Maryland game last week. So we've seen those things from Oregon as recently as 5 days ago.
And even then, y'all won by 18? Was it 18?
21. Yeah.
And then you won by 3 touchdowns. It's going to require that plus another something. That being said, like, road games at night, good environment. You never know, and that's why we'll tune in. That's why I'll be excited. Before the game, I'll probably convince myself to put $100 on Wisconsin money line, of course.
Oh yeah, the old money line, brave man.
Yeah, brave man. I'll lose money on my team all day long. That's part of my mantra. So
I love that.
Are you coming out? Are you able to make it out to Madison?
No, I'm not. I've got a couple of Southern Utah basketball games to broadcast this week, and if I didn't, I'd be with Southern Utah football. So I don't get to as many Oregon games as I'd always like to, but that's because my other job is absolutely freaking awesome, because I get to talk about even more sports over there. And we enjoyed talking about sports today. Ryan Harings, Locked On Badgers. I'm Spencer McLaughlin, Locked On Ducks. We appreciate you listening. See you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.